at the annual conference of the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents in December. So it's hot off the presses. The focus of the conference was on neuroscience and its implication for schools. And I think it will become clear to you as we go through the presentation today why Maple Crest Middle School stands out in this area. What you're going to hear about today is 3 innovations that Maple Crest has tackled in their effort to support students. We used video game technology or terminology to have a little fun in describing these innovations. So first you'll hear about the impact of professional learning communities, which definitely require collaboration as much as any massively multiplayer online game. Second, you'll hear about a phonics hack that is really a program that shortcuts the complexities and irregularities of written English to help students with reading. And third, you'll hear how Maple Crest students have improved their basic learning capacity and how they've improved their scores in the game of learning. You're going to hear from 2 extraordinary educators today, committed, accomplished, and inspiring. Tom Hughes is a science guy in the best tradition of science guys, and he brings his passion for science to his current role as principal of Maple Crest Middle School in Kokomo, Indiana. Maple Crest has been qualified as a STEM school by the state, which is no small feat. He previously served as a middle school science teacher for 7 years in the Tippecanoe, Indiana schools, and a year as assistant principal in Kokomo before his current principalship. He earned his master's degree from Purdue University and is currently pursuing his doctorate. Trudy Blue is the instructional coach and test coordinator at Maple Crest, and she works closely with the school's professional learning communities to increase student achievement. She mentors new teachers in instructional practice and particularly in the science and art of using data to support effective instruction. She also works with students in areas that the PLCs, the professional learning communities, determine need additional support. She studied at Indiana University and earned her elementary education credentials, including middle school English and social studies and K-12 cognitive disabilities. So, without further ado, here is the dynamic duo of Tom and Trudy.
Thank you very much for the introduction and everything that that goes with it. I mean, it goes without saying that you've been a big part of this as well, and I guess we appreciate your support and the support of BrainWare through this whole process. It's been a journey, to say the least, as to figure out what's out there, and we kind of came to you as a relationship and a partnership more than anything else. And so, you know, really the only thing that I want to make sure from the get-go is, yes, I am a science person. Yes, I taught science for ages, and that's kind of the lens in which I view administration. And so just a little bit about who we are here in the beautiful city of Kokomo. I think we're a pretty typical urban school that is in a manufacturing town. And so we are a little over half white. We are, for the most part, Black or multiracial for about 35% of our kiddos. We're sitting at about 60 to 70% free and reduced lunch. That's probably a little bit low compared to what it actually is due to some of the state changes. And we are about 26% special ed here. So we're higher than most in special ed. We're probably maybe a little bit higher on free and reduced and demographics across the board. So I hope that connects with somebody across the country and across the world as we just kind of lay the foundation as to who we are and what we're working with. So really the first thing that we had come across is the idea of PLCs, and that's nothing new. I think that's been around as a buzzword in education for better part of a decade, and at least for here in Kokomo, we said we did PLCs. We had a time and we met, and on the calendar it was called PLC. But in terms of what we did during those meetings, that has been our huge change. So about 3 or 4 years ago, we really honed in on what a PLC is, and the time set aside and the organization of it. And so I've worked with Trudy, my instructional coach, on really drilling into teachers and what they're doing and what does their data say and how do we brainstorm problems through that process. So I'm going to let Trudy just talk a little bit about that PLC journey and kind of help understand why we had a need for it and what our overall vision was for it.
Okay, Tom, and I want to second what you said about the partnership with BrainWare and Betsy. And we have been on this journey trying to figure out how do you turn a middle school around, and we couldn't find any examples to look to, so we decided we would do what felt right professionally. So we began with a training that Tom and I went to. It talked about PLCs, and what it really afforded us was the opportunity to talk with other administrators and teachers in other states and bounce ideas off of them on what's working where you are. We took away a lot of great things from that, brought it back to the building, and Tom is nothing if not creative, so he was able to carve out a period a day for our English language arts teachers to meet together and a period a day for our math teachers to meet together. And that was really the transition away from the what we were calling PLCs that was really more of a grade level meeting. In doing this, we really focused on what are we asking students to do and how will we know when they get it? And what will we do if they do get it? And what will we do if they don't? And using those 4 questions as the framework, we really started looking at what are we asking of the students. We broke it down into lots of learning targets, and we set I can statements. We shared that with our staff as far as this is what our students need to know to be competent. So this is something that has continued to evolve. I love that now we go in and we sit down and we have conversations about data. We do not sit and just say we're going to do something about English, we're going to do something about math. We have very, very defined goals on what we're trying to do.
And so Trudy, you guys have really spent quite a bit of time trying to unpack the standards.
Yes.
And confronting the situation and the challenge that many do, which is the standards have set a pretty high bar. There's a lot of content, a lot of things in there. And so I just wanted to ask our participants today, everybody who's attending, how many years you think it would take to teach all of the K-12 standards. And I'm going to launch a little poll here so that everybody can give us their opinions. So you should be able to see it. And your options are 10 years, 13 years, which would be 1 grade per standard K-12, 18 years, or 23 years. So we have people responding to what they think it would take to teach all of the K-12 standards. And so we're getting a variety of different answers. We're going to give everybody just a little more time to respond. Okay, it looks like most people have had a chance. And what I'm going to do is end the polling, and this should bring up the results, and I can share the results. So the most common answer was 18 years. Second to that was 13 years. So makes sense. You should be able to teach a year's worth of standards in 1 year in school. Sort of makes sense to that. But a number of people also thought it was 23 years. And the actual answer is right here. So based on research by Marzano and Kimball and taking into consideration the amount of time that's actually available in the school day, decided that it would take considerably more time than is actually available. So that process of unpacking the standards and figuring out what students are actually going to be able to master was a big deal.
And we still revisit that weekly. We spend part of our time looking at where are we in our standards mastery map and deciding it is better to teach deep than wide. It is better to master something than to cover it. Coverage just is something that's a teacher term, but mastery is something that is going to mean something long term to our students.
Absolutely. And so I still have conversations with teachers, as we get closer and closer to statewide testing time. They get worried that they haven't covered something. Hey, we haven't talked about ratios, or we haven't talked about scatter plots, or we haven't talked about Pythagorean theorem. And usually the conversation flips back around and says, what else have we not mastered at this point? We're as worried as we traditionally are about coverage compared to mastery. We would be a whole lot better off if we were as worried about the fact that we taught something 2 months ago and I had less than 50% mastery on it. Kept us up at night, or brought us a little bit of trepidation heading into our meetings and our testing session. We would be a whole lot better off. And that mindset shift certainly doesn't happen overnight. We still have several teachers that struggle with it, but that's usually the focus of our conversation in those meetings, because it's better to teach 1 or 2 things to the point of mastery than it is to teach 11 or 12 things where they've seen it and they don't remember how to use it, why it worked, or when to use this particular rule or that rule.
And another thing that we started as a school was we decided that we were going to do tier 2 intervention across the board for every student in our building. So if we are talking about teaching deep instead of wide, 8th grade right now is still really struggling in math with multi-step equations. And we're a diverse staff. We have, some people call them seasoned. I'm one of them, so I call them older teachers. And we have young teachers, and we have people scattered in between the 2 ends of the spectrum. It seems like a lot of our older teachers were struggling with the fact that we weren't covering things, and yet now the conversation is starting with them saying, we need to master this. If we can master this, then we know that there are going to be items on the test that are going to include this. So if we can master this, we are better than trying to cover all of these other things. Tom, would you talk a little bit about cat time?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier that, we've carved out time for different things as priorities change in the building and as new priorities show up. We are currently on our 4th master schedule in 5 years. So I know those of you that are in buildings realize master schedules are one of those sacred things that you just don't touch. And we've really, every year, tweaked different things to try and create a scenario in which teachers are freed up to do the work that they need to do, and kids are freed up to have the time to accomplish what it is that we're asking of them. So, what we first ran into, the major problem, first hurdle, we had this brilliant idea of PLCs and standards and everything's broken down. And when we came back with our first diagnostic test, we found out what we had was over 80% of our building that wasn't on grade level, and 60% of our kids were more than 2 grade levels behind. So we were trying to teach grade level standards to kids who couldn't read. And so we put on our thinking caps and went back to the scientific method and said, okay, what is it that works? And so we were kind of in a cycle of what's the next silver bullet. And I don't mean to, name drop anything, but we tried pretty much any reading program that you could come up with or that you could think of, whether it be Read 180, whether it be IXL, any number of other things. We tried them. We actually had a school improvement grant. We have had Achieve 3000 in our building. We've had everything that's anything really in our building to try and help address this need. And the first thing that we found that really made a huge difference in our kids, especially our kids of highest need, was a program called Readable English. And what struck me as different about this program, it wasn't just a tiered reading system, it was a completely new way of thinking about reading as a whole. And the point that they make when they start is exactly this graph. When we learn a foreign language as English speaking individuals, it's pretty easy to speak properly. It's really easy. You know, I took 4 years of Spanish in high school, and after year one, I could look at a word in Spanish and read it correctly. I knew where the stress was. I knew what the punctuation was. I knew what was and was not silent. And so when you look at this graph, only about 35% of school children can read words correctly. And anyone who's ever tried to teach a young child to learn, it's almost misery, because you're saying, okay, you know, alligator says alligator. The next time you find an A, it doesn't say it says A. And the next time it's silent. And you're just trying to teach the kid all of these rules. There's over 200 rules that you need to learn in the English language to be able to speak correctly. And this is just a couple of examples. You look at the U, and it says and then it says you, and then it says It says so many different things, all for a U. And in other languages, the U just says one sound. The words are broken out into groups, and so we make the effort to try and teach kids compounds, and so OUGH should make one sound. OUGH, if you look at each of those 7 words, they say a different sound each and every time. So if you were trying to read that, you actually have to look at words in context and think about what word is which. And if you weren't brought up in an English-speaking home or in a home that spoke proper English, there's really not much of a chance that you're going to understand what those words are. And then when you look at Readable English, the way they break it down, they keep the words intact, but then they separate syllables. And similar to in Spanish, they might have accent marks on certain areas to help you understand where the accent would or wouldn't go, or where the breaks in words are. And then they also gray out letters that are unspoken, they're silent. And then really the powerful piece is step 3, that it's called a glyph. It's just a symbol that goes over letters that might have different sounds, and it helps you understand which of the multiple sounds that O can make, so that when you're reading that and you see the 2 moons, and just like moon 2, the oo sound comes out, and so you can read that as ta-oo, 2. They're kind of like training wheels is how we explain it to parents, because when we talk about this phonics program or this phonetic marking that we're going to be adding to kids as they read, they don't understand it, but it's something that we kind of put them there. And the beauty of it is, just like training wheels, as you ride a bike with training wheels, your confidence grows, your ability grows, you take a little bit more risk. And so as you start taking the training wheels away, it's not a perfect, step 1 to step 2 to step 3. You might fall or crash into a bush, but at the end of the day, you're so much better off because of it. And so what we found at the very beginning of the question was, what happens when these glyphs disappear? But there are phonetic markings that actually form in your brain. And as you see those words, you recognize the words, and you're able to read words without the glyphs and without the grayed out silent words. So there's a process. And so what we found, even when kids weren't experiencing reading passages with Readable English, they were able to read at a much higher level. And so the very first year that we did this, we were looking at our diagnostic tool. We use iReady, which is a Curriculum Associates product. And so they expect in 8th grade, kids were going to grow 18 points. And so what we found when we did it, the kids who received Readable English, and they received it in addition to their grade level English curriculum, they grew over 80 points on average. And so that was the very first thing that really popped in and said, oh my word, these kids grew over 6 years in 1 year's time. how do we get this in the hands of more kids? And so word kind of got out, and I had some more teachers that said, hey, I want to do this. I want to do this. So we put back our thinking caps and we said, okay, pulled out of a class or added to their schedule to have a second class for Readable English. What happens if we combine it and create a hybrid class? So I had a 6th grade English teacher said, hey, I hear great things. I see the confidence in some of my kids as they leave. How about we do this? How about we do Readable English and grade level curriculum all at the same time in a 50-minute class? And so what ended up happening, that teacher, now their results weren't as fantastic as the class that was in addition to, obviously because their time was cut in half. But in 6th grade, the expected growth was 15 points per kid. And what we found was the class that was a hybrid Readable English class, they grew twice what was expected. And the group that didn't have Readable was pretty much on par. And so when you look at that, it's just more and more power to the fact that these kids being exposed to Readable English has helped them grow in confidence, grow in their ability to decode, and their ability to read fluently as they move on. And so we started, okay, if we've got kids that are now growing at more than double the rate, this might help us because, you know, as I talked earlier, we had over 80% of our kids who are not on grade level. And so just learning a year's worth of material isn't ever going to catch them up. And as Betsy pointed out earlier, we have 23 years worth of stuff to cover in 13 years. So from the very beginning, you almost have to cover 2 years worth of stuff every single year to stay on track. And so what we found is we have kids who are supposed to be learning, and so we rolled it out again, and we added another teacher. So now I've got 3 teachers covering Readable English. At the end of that next year, we looked back and we said, you know, as a school, we're doing pretty good because typical growth is 100, and our average kid that wasn't in Readable grew 167. So they grew 67% more than expected. As a building principal, knowing that I've got a group of kids who are coming to us behind grade level, that's great to see. But what is even more powerful, and when you look to the left, the Readable English kids, each of them is at 214 growth percent and what is expected. And those are the kids who are in Readable English. Those are the kids who are getting this phonics, getting these glyphs, and getting the practice, and growing in the reading confidence, because those are the things that really translate over, at least for us in the middle school. We've got kids who are reluctant learners and reluctant readers. And so when they are able to read, see the difference.
I'll also throw in there really quickly before Tom talks on the data piece. I ran into a student that began that first year, and he came to us reading at a kindergarten level. He left us reading at 8th grade level within 2 years. He's at the high school now as a freshman, and I asked how he is doing. He is passing all of his classes except biology, but he promised me that he would get in contact with me and let me know if he needed a study buddy to help out. It's really more of completing things in class for that class. But to know that we sent a student to the high school that came to us as a 7th grader reading at kindergarten level, and he is now passing all of his classes except the biology, and that just would not have happened without this program.
I just wanted to point out, so what this is a chart of all the schools in our district. And so this is our formative assessment tool that we use. And so each of those blue diamonds is a different school: elementaries, alternative schools, high schools. And so what you see there at the top is Maple Crest. That's my school. And it's the same data that I shared earlier, but we are about 170 points of growth, about 70% higher than either. We're kind of towards the left, at least as a district we are, as well as Maple Crest as a school. Our performance is just slightly above 30% of the median national percentile. So as a percentile of the nation, we see that the same thing as a state test, but that is certainly higher than it would have been if our growth wasn't 170 points. And so, we put this up on a presentation to the district, and what ended up happening from that was I had other principals calling me saying, "What are you guys doing? Why is your dot so much higher than mine?" About what we're doing. So this is one of our elementary schools here in Kokomo, Bonaire Elementary. They said, if it works for middle school kids, why can't we start this before they get to you so that we can catch them before they're 7th graders reading at a kindergarten level? Why don't we catch them as 3rd graders at a kindergarten level? And so there was a teacher over there that, and so this is her result. She had a group of kiddos and she pushed them into Readable English. And so what we ended up having was about the same results, almost twice what a group without Readable was able to achieve. So the group that was there at that elementary school that wasn't a Readable English class, they were a little over 80% of their annual typical growth. And her group of kids were almost 180% of their annual. Showed growth as well in the stretch. This is one of both Trudy and I's favorite children. She'll speak for herself, but she's going to share a little bit about what Readable English did for her.
Yeah, I need to shift over here. I'm going to go to all of our very favorite website, right, YouTube, and here we're going to hear from Tariana.
Betsy, we can't hear. At
Oh,
least
really?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Hang on a second. I'm glad you told me that. So I think I need to do a separate, let me just,
You want to try the embedded one and see if it works?
Okay, I'm going to share computer sound. I think that will.
I like the songs.
Yep.
All right, so let me
There's
get
songs
that.
that
Let me
go
back
with
up.
it.
Sorry about that,
I like
everybody. But here we go. Let's hear from Tariana.
Yeah, it made me feel really good about myself, cause like last year before we did all of this, I really felt down, like I'm never gonna get nowhere because I don't know how to read. But now that I know the glyphs and I know how to read with the glyphs, it makes me feel a lot much better. Like I go home and tell my mom yeah, I know how to do this and I just learned this today. And normally I'd be yeah. She'd be what you learn? Nothing. I don't know nothing. And now it feels like I can read much better. And I like it, really, I like it. It's just great. Because I wanted to switch schools, but I'm no, because I have a program that's helping me with my reading, and I know another school don't have it, so might as well stay and get this year over with, because I'm going to the high school next year. And I like the songs with the glyphs.
There's songs that go with it.
I like them. I always tell Miss Casso, play them, because they're just fun. It's
Give me an example of one that you really like.
Hey April. She's hey April, see me wave. But last year, my teacher, she was really she'll make moves and smile with it, and when I don't feel being bothered, she'll be hey, and it makes me start laughing. Normally I'd be okay, that word is too big, I'm not gonna read it, I'm just gonna skip over it. Now I just focus and try to get the word out, because you can sound it out because the glyphs are over them, and I know I know all of the glyphs. And when I was when in 6th grade, I used to I don't like when I'm reading big paragraphs. I don't like to read out loud, because I think that's what messes me up. But now like this year I like to read the big, like the long paragraphs, and I like to read out loud.
So that's an example, and I want to tell you that I actually saw Tariana read, and she did, in fact, not want to read the short paragraph. She wanted to wait until the long paragraph came up. So that's...
All right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit more data in terms of readable English versus the non-readable English kiddos. We are talking about percentages of kids, so this isn't scale score as much as anything else. But as you can see, our gains of no gain, we only had a quarter of our kiddos that were no gain and readable, and upwards of almost 40% of our kids showed zero gain. That were in the regular classrooms. The 0 to 10 was identical, and then the flip of that on the 10 plus, we had over 60% of our readable kiddos that were showing 10 plus gain, which we associate with over a year's worth of growth. And so it's just more and more and more data comes in, and more encouraging that this is really a powerful piece in our literacy program, in addition to what we're already doing in our grade level classes.
And in December, Tom, when you were talking, you really emphasized the fact that your kids, if kids are coming in at a second grade or even a kindergarten level, but it's not a year's worth of growth, just doesn't do it. And
absolutely. When we were talking about it, we would look at kids and we'd say, hey, they're leaving us 8th grade and they're only at a 5th grade level. We'd look and say, well, they came to us at a 2nd grade level. They've grown a year every year that they're here. But at the end of the day, they're still leaving us 3 years behind, and they're probably not going to be successful at the high school, or at least as successful as they could be. And here's just a different way to look at something, and this is tied to more specifically our special education population, as that very first slide talked about. We're near 30% special ed in this building. So we want to see, is this working? And absolutely, 71%. About 10% higher than our general population. We had 71% of our special education students who were showing 10 plus growth, and only 21% were 0 or negative, versus a little less than half of our special education students were really showing a year's worth of growth when they weren't in readable English. And so, obviously 71% is not 100, but it's in the right direction, and it's certainly a good start. And so that kind of, was good enough for a little while. And as we sat around those PLCs, it was helping. But we knew there was always a little bit more. And so that led us back to the scientific method. If you talk to my teachers, I probably found another book, or I found another conference, or I found something else. I mean, I know something else is out there. And so through conversations with different people and different websites and looking around, I came across something called BrainWare Safari. And so again, through the same intrigue that I had with readable English, and it was so different from everything else that was out there, I wanted to give BrainWare a shot. And like I said, I'm a scientist. So just like readable English started with one teacher in one little group in the morning and one little group in the afternoon, I'm not one to just jump head first into something new, whatever the next new thing is. I want to find if it works with our kids and our teachers and our system. And so if any of you are curious about readable English or curious about BrainWare, I would absolutely recommend that you find a teacher that is interested and pilot it. And so that's what we do in my building. I have teachers doing the same thing, but the reason why it struck a chord with me is it was different than everything else that I had seen out there. And so, if you look at this chart, the world that we live in is really those top 6 little boxes, and maybe the 7th box right underneath it. If you've got a good teacher who really focuses on higher order thinking and problem solving, they've got good questioning strategies. They're working in the top levels of Bloom's. Those kids are thinking about things, and we are a STEM building. So obviously that's a big push for us. Problem-based and project-based learning is a huge thing. And we see that higher order thinking coming out in the STEM. But what we found is we had a lot of kids who came to school, they worked hard, they did the work, and for some reason, the connections just weren't being made to some of those higher order thinking. They would try, they would get their work in, they might even be an A and B student because they could play school. But what we found was that they struggled with some of those bottom two boxes, the core executive functions of working memory and cognitive flexibility were just not there. If you ask them a lower level thinking question, if it was the capital of a country, if it was, you know, some of those lower level things, and sometimes the things that we test most often, they could do it. But the moment you gave them a project, you gave them maybe something with very little instruction and only a rubric to go on, they fell apart. And so we knew that was another area that we needed some help in and our kids needed some love in. And the other one that was really interesting to me is the inhibitory control. We found that kiddos who struggled behaviorally were actually lacking in those core functions. And it wasn't a necessary choice that they made, but it was something that they just couldn't do to themselves. They've got to just blurt it out. Maybe it's the wrong time. And if you got the wrong teacher in front of them, or a teacher that can't effectively manage a student like that, then they end up getting all referrals and they're out of class even more. And so that was the big piece for me as a principal and somebody that sees discipline on a daily basis. I wanted to see where that gains were coming from. And so that's another piece of this BrainWare. And so really, as a scientist, I'm looking at this, and we did a cognitive test to start. And you see that bar there on the right, 92% of my kids were at risk for their working memory, meaning I only have about 8% of my population who are at grade level or where they're supposed to be in their cognitive functioning. And so it was interesting. I got a phone call from BrainWare right after we took a special education focused building because the only bar that's higher than us was a special education school. And so I said, no, that's just what we've got. Those are the kids that we're working with. And so we knew right then and there that this was going to be a group of kiddos that would totally benefit from increased cognitive functioning. And so we said, hey, let's pilot it. Let's see if it works. And let's see where kids are going to go from this, because it's totally different. And it doesn't teach the kids anything according to them. They'll be on BrainWare for weeks and say, when are we going to learn something? And I told them, this isn't about learning anything. You're not going to know any more presidents. You're not going to know any more dates. You're not going to know anything at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. You're going to be able to think better. You're going to be able to remember better. You're going to be able to process better. And so these are just some percentile scores for my kids. The only thing that my kids were at or above average with are visual motor speed, and that's probably because they play a lot of video games and play a lot of sports. But really everything else is in the bottom third. So if you don't know BrainWare Safari, it's a computer software that develops cognitive skills, and it gives them an opportunity in a very non-threatening way to practice thinking, to practice molding things in their mind. And really it just, again, just like Readable English, builds in their confidence, because it's designed to make them fail in a sense at the beginning or as they progress to harder levels, and then they've got to be able to overcome. They've got to overcome what might have not been possible before, and encourages them to think about things a little differently, to try again, to persevere, and all of those things that we try to teach as a school and try to teach as teachers. That is just not able to be brought into a typical school day with 20 some odd kids sitting in front of us in their nice neat rows as we are here from 8 o'clock till 3 o'clock. BrainWare has taken something from the clinical setting and brought it to kids and brought it to schools, and for that I am eternally grateful. what ended up happening, we sat down with BrainWare and we talked about intervention time and part of our schedule. We had as Trudy talked earlier, tier 2 intervention set up for all of our kids in our building. And I had that time, but what I didn't have is teachers. All my teachers were already grouped up. I didn't have anyone else to do this. And so we kind of looked around and we said, okay, I've got a couple paraprofessionals who I could pull from some of their push-in time or some of their small group time, and I could have them kind of monitor this. And so when we met, they said, let's try and get 10 to 14 weeks of 30 minutes to 45 minutes each time, 3 to 5 times a week. We're going to shoot for 36 plus sessions. And in the real world, if you're in a building, it didn't happen. Fire drills happened, snow delays happened, illnesses, sicknesses. What we ended up with was 8 weeks of about 30 minutes. We averaged about 15 sessions per kid, and those kids are still continuing to this day in BrainWare. But even with only about half of the usage that we really wanted before we pulled our data at semester break when we did this presentation, what we found is the kids were growing. They were growing as a percentile. And, we looked at that first graph where we were in the bottom third of just about every category. Even our kids who did less than 12 sessions, they were growing over 3 percentile points. But our kids who were doing 12 or more, they were up 6. And so they were taking it seriously and they were working on it. And again, this was being integrated into what we were doing, not by licensed teachers, but by paraprofessionals. And then what we found is just as that very small segment of our kiddos continues to grow as they get more and more sessions done, implementation grows. And so you can look at other buildings that have gotten 35 sessions and they were at 21 percentile point gain. If we were at 30 before and we get a 21 percentile gain, at least our kids are average now in their cognitive functioning, and we can continue on from there. So we are absolutely working towards getting those kids into it. And as we implemented BrainWare to a greater degree this semester, we've pushed into some new areas and we've pushed in more time with more purpose. So it's no longer a pilot for us. It is how we do things, and it's part of our intervention structure. Similar graph to what we showed earlier for Readable English. We have a little bit higher, actually, 0 gain for our BrainWare kids, but what we found was no one was in the middle. We didn't have a single kid who did BrainWare that was between 0 and 10 points of growth. They either absolutely jumped in and did it, and if you look at that 70%, our scale score gain compared to our 55 showing the 10 plus. What that means is the kids who took BrainWare and took it and did it the right way, absolutely every single one of them were 10 plus. And we did have a section of kids who just, they weren't engaged in BrainWare for whatever reason. It may have been the wrong setting. It may have been the wrong time. But we're revisiting for those 30% of kids and trying to get them into a different setting so that they can have the opportunity to grow just the same. Similar again to what we did before was what happens in special education. And just like in Readable English, what we found was we have 70% of our special ed kids in BrainWare that were only about 55% of our non-BrainWare special ed kiddos that were showing a year's worth of growth. And so every single metric that we look at when we compare Readable English to non-Readable English or BrainWare to non-BrainWare, our kids are showing appreciable difference in their ability to learn, their ability to think, and their ability to progress at more than a grade level per year. And when we get to the end of this presentation, there's absolutely the most powerful piece is what happens to the kids that got both. And so there's my Billy Mays. And it was actually a time crunch when we were putting this presentation together. We didn't know what the outcome was going to be. This was, BrainWare was still our pilot. We had about 40 kids, about 10% of our population that were pushed into this BrainWare idea. And so, like I said, I had some paraprofessionals that had a computer program. I didn't know other than it was different, and I liked the way that it was trying to solve a problem that we all face. Kids can't think. And I just want to talk through this last slide before you guys put any questions up. But if you can look up here in the middle of this, what you have are BrainWare but not Readable English, and Readable English but not BrainWare. So that 58 and that 54, those are both good. That means over half of our kids have a year's growth halfway through a school year. This is only first semester data. So if they were in one or the other, they were between 54 and 58% of them had already shown a year's worth of growth. If you compare that to the bottom, the non-readable and the non-BrainWare, only 48% of our kids had shown a year's worth of growth. And 37% of our kids who had neither intervention showed zero or negative change. Again, if you go all the way back up to the top, our kids who got both, our kids who were in BrainWare and our kids who were in Readable English, only 14% of them had zero or negative growth, and we had 79% of kids show a year's worth of growth in one semester. The only way we're able to meet the demands of what these kids are coming to us with, especially in a middle school, we're 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they're coming to us 80% not at grade level, is for them to show 2 years growth. Every single one of those 79% of kids are at or above 2 years growth in 1 year. They're on track to have 2+ years of growth every single year they get here. And if we can repeat that 3 times, they'll have 6 years growth in the 3 years they're here in the middle school. Trudy shared earlier about our kiddo that came to us at kindergarten and left us at 8th grade. That is our absolute goal, is that every single one of our kids is making progress, not only towards a year, but making progress towards back to grade level proficiency. And the only way we have found is for our kiddos to be in both BrainWare and in Readable English, as well as their general ed math, their general ed English, their science and their social studies, the way they're supposed to be getting grade level standards. This isn't about dumbing it down. This isn't about anything other than meeting kids where they're at, their cognitive ability, their reading ability, and their reading fluency, as well as their confidence.
And Tom said earlier that one of the things that we do well at this school is if we see that something is really on target, we don't keep it hidden under a bush, we expand it. So after we looked at these gains and sat down and had conversations with Betsy and Roger and talked about, you know, why aren't all of our kids that are tier 3 that are severely behind, why aren't they in BrainWare as well? And we are working now to get all of our students that are receiving, we call it enhancement, but an intervention, all of those students are going to be in BrainWare with certified teachers for the most part, and pursuing this, and the teachers seeing the skills that are represented in this.
One thing I did forget to mention when we started talking about the cognitive delays and the deficiencies in our kiddos, as you look at BrainWare, it reminds me a lot of what we use at the high school level and beyond for concussion protocol, because what they're testing in some of those visual activities, and they're all computer-based, just like BrainWare, is how well your brain can think, how well your brain can process, and how well your brain can remember. And so what we ended up having was we had kiddos that were testing as if they were suffering from a concussion, and they had no physical trauma in the recent past for that to be evident. And so what we had was, you know, if you've ever suffered a concussion and you understand how hard it is to think, how hard it is to test, how hard it is to remember, that is the cognitive ability of our kiddos when they showed up here. And the reason why they're struggling with school and learning and thinking, and the reason why they have a defeatist attitude, is because they just can't. This has given them absolutely the tools to do school. And so with that renewed ability and that renewed confidence, we're seeing kids just absolutely astronomical growth, and it's been fantastic, because that's the only way we're ever going to reach our kiddos. I keep saying it, 80% of our current kiddos are coming to us not at grade level.
So I hope everybody, we still have a few minutes left, and I want to encourage everybody to type some questions into the chat window or into the Q&A, either place we can find them. And maybe you'd just like to sum up a little bit while everybody's thinking of their questions.
Oh, absolutely. It is never a one-size-fits-all plan. Every building is different. Every kid has a different need. And I would encourage anyone out there listening who has either the ear of a school administrator or a building that they run themselves or a district that they run themselves, always be looking for something. The moment that we become comfortable, I think we become complacent. When we are thinking about our schools and we're thinking about the purpose of education, we have got to do a better job finding a way to meet the needs of kids. And if society changes, we've got to change. If kids are coming to us with different needs, we've got to change what we offer. And it is absolutely, reading is not an option. Reading and the ability to read is the gateway to all things new. It is the gateway to new knowledge. It is the gateway to these kids becoming whatever it is they want to be. As a sixth grader, as a seventh grader, they may not have an idea of what it is they want to be when they grow up, but it is going to be something, and they're going to have to be able to read, whether that be a college entrance exam, whether that be a tax form. There's something that they're going to have to read, and if they are not able to read, they may not have to be able to read, a 1600 Lexile. They may not have to be able to be, well spoken in the works of Shakespeare, but they've got to be able to read. They've got to be able to be literate at a level that allows them to learn. Not just functionally literate where they can read. I mean literate so they can learn. And so what we found is when kids leave us after being in these programs, they're more confident in their ability. They're more willing to take chances. And when they're able to take chances, they've got the BrainWare connection so that they can think and they can mold and they can process through the things that they're now able to read. And that's why you saw over 70% of our kiddos have shown a year's growth in less than one semester. How much, I just got a question on there. How much time per day on BrainWare is needed to get results? I don't know what bare minimum is, but I'm pretty sure we were real close to it. Like I said, I mean, we were 30 minutes a day, maybe by the time the computers got logged on, kids got in, maybe 30 minutes a day, and we were averaging about 15 sessions. So, I mean, you could get that much done in less time than it took us, but I didn't know everything that was involved. It took some time for us to get the initial cognitive testing out of the way. Had to order some computer mice to add to the student laptops. There's just a couple pieces with technology, so that's what pushed it back. But I'm absolutely looking forward to being able to maybe hop back on here or maybe just pass the information along to Betsy of what happens when we do it the right way. Because I've got kiddos who are already 15 to 30 days of BrainWare in, and they're showing great gains, and they're going to continue on this semester. And we also have a new group. Our goal is to have over 150 kids on BrainWare out of a building of 410 this coming semester because of the power that we saw and the change that we saw in those kiddos. So I would say probably bare minimum 30 minutes just to get them in. It's recommended that they work only about 10 minutes per game or per activity. So that gives them the option or the goal of trying to get through maybe 3 different games in a given day, because each game requires them to think in a different way. So I would say if you could carve out 30 minutes, whether that be before school, after school, as a push-in, pull-out, again, it doesn't take a licensed teacher. It takes a coach. It takes a motivator. It takes someone to work with the kiddos. But I've even got some of the most ridiculous, crazy, encouraging teachers on it this current semester, and they're coming up. They're gamifying the game. I mean, it's ridiculous. And what I see are kids wanting to do it. They're wanting to do the thing that makes them better. And there's nothing better as a building principal than to walk into a classroom knowing kids are learning, knowing they're getting what they need. And so I would say as long as you've got somebody that loves kids and can smile, you've got a person that can do. BrainWare's power is in the program and not in the person.
So I want to just add, we do recommend 30 to 45 minutes per day, and 3 to 5 times a week for 12 to 14 weeks. And the reason we recommend that is because that's what our research, we have 30 some studies, some peer-reviewed published research, and others that have been replicated in school settings. Typically in a school, we are very happy with 30 minutes 3 times a week if we can get that, because it's just, as everybody knows, the schedules are challenging. And we get, you can see what happened with a much shorter period of time at that bare minimum, but we know there's a lot more. So, Tom's advice is exactly right on. I just wanted to sort of explain why it is that we recommend what we do.
Betsy's here for the real world answer and the peer reviewed answer. As a scientist, I love the peer reviewed, but what matters more to me is what happened in my building with my people and my kids and the gains that they made. And so 30 minutes is what you need minimum. But man, I'm looking forward to, like I said, what happens when we implement it the way that they've recommended, and how much more are those kids going to grow.
And just also, someone on the chat posted that it takes the students and the teachers, and it's a difficult task. This is not for the faint-hearted. If you're going to just have teachers that comply instead of invest, then you probably are not going to see the same kind of gains that we have. We have staff here that are our number one focus. We talk about it daily, several times a day, is we're here for the kids.
And really the final piece of it, I came into a building that's, a failing school, an F school, a school that was struggling in a lot of ways. And the craziest part to me is, even since then, in terms of the proficiency of kids coming to us, our kids are coming to us lower and lower and lower each and every year. And the work that my teachers are able to do and the gains that they're able to make with these kids, if you want something different, you're going to have to do it different. And hopefully, if you are district personnel, that you empower your principals to think outside the box. If it's in a book somewhere, it's been done, and it really may or may not work. But you've got to be able to empower your principals to think outside the box as to what might be needed. And if you're a principal, absolutely, you need to tell your teachers, let's not keep doing the same thing we're doing. We've got to find a different way to meet the ever-changing needs of our kiddos. And so if you're not doing that already, absolutely you need to be doing that, because the only way teachers are going to feel comfortable with this is if they're able to feel supported. And the only way kids are going to be able to do this if they've got teachers that aren't afraid to do what they're doing.
So here's to Tom and to Trudy, who have unafraid teachers and have really put their reputations and their energy behind something that they really believed was going to make a difference for kids, and you can see the results. So here's to innovation, and here's to doing something different and getting some very, very different results, and with a huge benefit to all those kiddos in Kokomo at Maple Crest. So Tom and Trudy, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're in between letting school out and going and picking up kids and all the things that your days contain. So, and we're getting lots of thank yous.
I threw my cell phone number on there. If somebody wants to shoot me a text or call me sometime, if you don't want to email, either way, I think BrainWare is a piece that more schools need. Is it right for every school? Maybe not. But I would absolutely encourage anyone that's listening to give it a shot within their school. Grab the right teacher, grab the right kids, and just see. What's to harm other than we found something else and we tried something else? Because I'm guessing if you're listening to this webinar, you've still got a few kids who aren't making the progress that you would like, or you've got a few kids who might not be at grade level. And so if that's you, and if this is something that you're working on, please reach out, call me, shoot me an email, and I'll be more than happy to talk with you in more detail about how it might be implemented in your building.
Thank you, Betsy. We appreciate all your work with us.
Well, we appreciate you, and you and your team are the ones that did this all, and the kids, and you know, hats off to them. That's what we care about as much as almost as much as you do. And we don't know them personally, but we do care, and so it's terrific. So thank you so much. Again, for those of you who were participating today, you'll get an email automated that when the recording is available, probably later today or tomorrow for sure. And we'll hope to see you again at another webinar sometime soon. I expect we'll do one in February, and we'll let you know about that. So everybody have a terrific day. Again, thanks, Tom and Trudy.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye.